Hello, everyone, and welcome to Follow the Yellow Brick Road to Business Value. I am very pleased to be joined today by Naomi Bloom. Naomi is one of the most recognized names in software. You may recognize Naomi from the main stage at the annual HR Technology Conference, where she's appeared nearly every year since its inception, and she has been known to break out into song. You may also recognize Naomi from her insightful and extremely witty blog, In Full Bloom, where she puts current innovations and trends into the perspective of a lifetime dedicated to the intersection of human resource management and IT. Naomi, in short, is a legend. And today we get Naomi all to ourselves. So as you enjoy her session, please get your questions into the WebEx Q&A queue. We will do our absolute best to get as many of these answered as possible. Naomi, over to you.
Amy, thank you so much for that introduction, and welcome everyone. Today, I'd really like to cover three broad topics. One of them is my strongly held belief that human resource management, that is the people side of the business, is what drives business value. And it's easy to prove that. It's easy to demonstrate that. You need only go to your CEO, ask that person whether or not what they do matters. And when they say, of course it matters, possibly giving you a bad look at the same time, you simply say, human resource management is about your doing a better job, and that would benefit our company. So I'm going to start with that hypothesis that human resource management drives business value. And then I'm going to offer you a choice. You can approach human resource management and the enabling capabilities, the delivery system for it, on a whack-a-mole basis, dealing with it issue by issue and ending up in an absolute mess. Or, and I'd like to propose the or, you can plan for human resource management and that delivery system on a more holistic, a more structured, a more strategic basis. And I would like to make the case that that's important to do and take you down the yellow brick road as a methodology for doing it. And then last but by no means least, I really believe that in 2012, actually it's been true for several years, technology is at the heart of our ability to do human resource management in the way that drives business value. And I want to talk about what I believe are some absolute musts as you think about the delivery system you wish to have, which is not necessarily the delivery system that you do have. I'd like to throw my 2 cents worth in on what constitutes really the important, the good capabilities. So with that, let's go to the next slide, Amy. And the hypothesis that human resource management drives business value, that in fact the behavior of individuals and organizational groups is really the only source of competitive advantage in today's global economy, and that what we do, not necessarily just what the HR department does, of course, because human resource management incorporates the work of everyone, but what we do and what the HR function leads is really the source of business value. Next. We can have a wonderful business strategy. We can plan ourselves blue, but that is a necessary but not sufficient condition. We've got to somehow get the entire workforce lined up, going in the right direction, engaged, capable, wanting to do the work of the organization. In fact, wanting to improve whatever strategies we've come up with, whatever outcomes we are headed for. So the core point here is that not only does human resource management drive business value, but flawed human resource management disables business value. And obviously, we want the first and not the second. Next, please. Now, the set of questions we're going to go through rather quickly, and I'm not going to comment on all of them, but this set of questions is a subset of a list I've been keeping for years. And I do update it, obviously, to make it current, but these are the kinds of questions that people come up to me, end users come up to me at conferences, over lunch, over drinks in a bar. I'm traveling on business. I'm sitting next to someone on the plane. These are the things that are on people's minds. And each one of these questions in the form that is specific to a company pop up like little whack-a-mole varmints if you were playing the carnival game of whack-a-mole. So close your eyes with me for a moment. Imagine a tabletop in a carnival setting with holes in the tabletop. You're standing there with a mallet. You're the HR executive. Out of each one of these little poles, on a random basis, a little mole head comes up, a little varmint comes up. One is labeled ERP, one is labeled SaaS, one is labeled competencies, one is labeled payroll. You don't know which one's going to pop up next, and you have two choices. You can play the game, stand there with your mallet, hope for the best, pound them down as fast as they pop up, or you can choose to do a much more orderly and strategic planning approach. So I'm going to walk through a few of these questions. I'm sure some of them are on your minds, but they're really here just to give you the flavor of what happens if you deal with each of them on its own basis. So on this first slide, on slide number 9, which is up right now, that second bullet point is a really good one. In order to do analytics, and everyone's talking about analytics, you know, do I have to do this whole data warehouse thing? Is that really the only way to achieve that, or are there better techniques? On the next slide, let me highlight the second bullet point. Can we afford or manage the integration of separate talent management applications? I know that there are many people on this call in whose organizations they are currently running 4, 5, 6, 8, 10 different talent management applications. They might even have multiple applications for the same talent management process that they either run different ones around the world, or they acquired a company and they have different piece parts, or maybe they just ended up with multiples. And obviously there's integration issues, there's upgrade issues, there's all kinds of issues. And a legitimate question is, can we really afford this? Next slide. I personally am an absolute stickler when it comes to definitions. And I hate it when the industry's marketing arm uses a term to mean several different things. I think it's confusing to the market. I think it's confusing to customers. And I get into an awful lot of harangue on this point because I feel strictly about it, but maybe that's the English major in me. Nonetheless, whatever you think is SaaS, whether you agree with my definition, which we'll talk about later, but whatever you think it is, we know that lots and lots of vendors today are calling whatever they have SaaS, software as a service. And we know there are differences in what they're offering. Do those differences matter? Should I be worrying about those differences? Legitimate questions. Next slide. Another really good point. What type of social technology capabilities do we need? Everybody is talking about the use of collaboration in HRM processes. Collaboration is good. We've always been talking about increasing collaboration. Now we have various technologies that can enable it. Which technology should I be using? How should I be plugging them into various HRM processes? Should I be looking at just doing it internal to my company? Should I be looking at collaborating across organizations? Lots of questions there. Next slide, please. What about outsourcing? Now, it turns out most companies are outsourcing. They may not think about it that way, but the minute you subscribe or license a software package, you have outsourced the design, development, support, et cetera, of that product. We used to do that in-house. What about background checking? Very widely used in the U.S. I know from my European colleagues, a little less widely used, but almost nobody does all the background checking themselves. They might do reference checking, but if we're looking at people's criminal records, verifying that they went to the colleges they said they went to, we almost always use a third party for that. Increasingly, we're using third parties for global payroll, for all manner of things. And just deciding, what should we outsource? What should we do ourselves? And if we are going to outsource, how do we look at that? How do we bound it? How do we pick providers? Lots of good questions there. Next slide. Consolidation in our industry. I actually wrote a blog post about this entitled I think it's called the Consolidation Fairy Tales, and that's Fairy, not the boat. It's very unnerving to end users to wake up one morning and discover that the vendor they loved, the vendor they picked deliberately, has been acquired, and who has acquired them but the vendor they didn't love and the vendor they turned down in the first place. And that really does happen. So, how do we stay on top of what's going on? How do we know whether the vendors that we are working with today are potential acquirers or acquirees? And how do we stay on top of all of that, and how do we plan for it? Next slide, please. I mentioned a minute ago, as part of the outsourcing question, global payroll outsourcing. Well, a lot of companies start out in one country and gradually have a few people wandering around the countryside, crossing borders. They may then acquire something in another country, and suddenly they have a big lump of people in another country. And if you look at the global payroll scene, what you'll discover is that it matters very much to understand what you are asking for. Do you have big lumps of people? Do you have small groups of people? Are they wandering the countryside? Are they planted in the sense of a manufacturing plant? Lots of questions here. Next slide, please. And really, this first bullet point is really trying to say, I don't know what your key issues are. But take out your anxiety closet list of issues, plop them in here, and really ask what the implications are for your human resource management delivery system. And if you look at it just from the perspective of one issue, you're going to get very different answers than if you try to look at it from the perspective of all the issues that you're trying to balance. Next slide. So this is our hapless HR executive equipped with a mallet and playing the game of whack-a-mole, not a very comfortable place to be. Even worse than playing the game of whack-a-mole is the kind of HRM delivery system that you're likely to end up with, which is the next slide. And this is a personal favorite slide. I would have said Rube Goldberg, but that's an expression that many younger people don't have any connection to. A Rube Goldberg device is an invention that looks like it was put together by a committee that was each assigned a small piece of the puzzle and never knew the whole picture. This is an HRM delivery system put together the whack-a-mole approach. Next slide, please. So what's an HR leader to do? Some of you may have heard of a gentleman named Ray Wang, who is a colleague of mine, a fellow Enterprise Irregular. And Ray is so visible online that many of us suspect he has figured out how to clone himself to be in multiple places at once. I have not learned how to do that. So it's not going to be possible for me to assist everybody I would like to help. So what I've tried to do here and what we're now going to talk through is the exact same process I would use if I were working with one of your companies to take you down the yellow brick road from today's human resource management policies and practices and guidelines and so on, and your current delivery system to where you really want to be. Next slide. If you'll notice, there are wizards. These are good wizards. What I haven't shown on this slide, which really has the various steps in the process, are the evil creatures that you will meet along the way. The passive-aggressive folks, the ones who smile at you and say, yeah, I agree, that sounds wonderful, and will sabotage you the minute your back is turned. The, dare I say it, the vendors who tell you that their product can do absolutely everything you want it to do, and of course it cannot. So on a very positive note, you're only going to see good wizards as we go along, but in fact you need to beware at every stage of this thought process, at every stage of running a strategic HRM and HRM delivery systems planning process, that in addition to the good guys, there are pitfalls along the way. Next slide, please. So really the first place to start, and we should always start at the top, is to understand the environment in which our specific organization has to conduct business and be successful. And obviously that's going to be very different. If you're a state government, versus a software company versus a chain of fast food restaurants versus a manufacturing firm, all of you are going to have very different lines of business, types of workforces, and so on. But in fact, all of you are going to be subject to a set of pressures that, frankly, we're all feeling and we all have to learn to cope with. And this slide and the next ones are really about those pressures. We need to keep them in mind all the time because they affect how our individual organization sets its business strategy, how it sets its the outcomes that it's trying to achieve, how it develops the tactics for getting there. We are all subject to these pressures. Next slide, please. And these are the rest of those pressures, okay? In order to achieve our companies, our organizations' desired business outcomes in the context of these pressures, the next slide is going to highlight some of the strategies, some of the ways in which we might succeed. Next slide, please. If you are going to be successful, if you care to be growth-oriented, and not all companies are, if you are a cohesive organization, so not a conglomerate where each piece of the puzzle operates completely independently, then this is a reasonable set of organizational strategies. Again, not all of them will apply to you, but they're just a talking list, just to give you the flavor, okay? And for example, achieving economies of scale. That is a very common strategy for many organizations, and it forces us to look at those areas of our organization that lend themselves to economies of scale. In the HRM sense, it asks of us to perhaps think about outsourcing a bit more, okay? And one of the reasons that SaaS, software as a service, is getting so much attention these days is because it takes the burden of running a data center and all that goes with running a data center, at least for a specific application, takes that off of our shoulders. So maybe we could devote our data center efforts to those applications that are unique to our business. Next slide, please. Other areas of organizational strategy that many organizations are working on today is how to have a more adaptable organizational design, how to be more agile in how we organize ourselves to get the work done, how to be more flexible. Next slide, please. So with that back, understanding we are collectively under a set of business and environmental pressures, we are collectively focusing on a set of strategies. The first place to start for your own specific company is understanding the vision of that business. And these are the questions that need to be answered in order to do that. Every organization has a reason for its existence, a raison d'etre. Every organization has a value proposition. And if you're a public sector organization, you may not think of them as customers, but believe me, they are. You don't have shareholders, but you have many different stakeholders. You certainly have employees, and in all cases, we have to present a value proposition that causes people to want to support the mission of the organization. The last bullet point on this screen is very key and often not present. It's all well and good to talk about vision and rationale and what are we trying to accomplish and we're inspirational and all of that, but unless there are specific metrics, target values for those metrics, designated time periods over which we intend to achieve those target values, it's nothing but fluff. Until you can get specific, we don't really know how to measure whether or not we've actually achieved what we had in mind. So I'm a big believer in analytics. I am a big believer in using this to drive personal decision-making as well as professional and organizational decision-making. And someday, if I run into you at a convenient moment, maybe with a glass of wine in my hand, I will tell you how I use metrics to make the most critical decision of my life, choosing Ron Wallace as my husband. Next slide, please. Once we know where we're trying to go, what the company, the organization is trying to accomplish, what we want to be in 3 to 5 years, and what that would look like, now we have to say, how are we going to get there? What is it we as an organization are going to do well? What aren't we going to do? How are we going to meet stakeholder expectations? How are we going to drive value? What kind of products, what kind of services, to what kind of markets? All the typical strategy questions. And every industry, every organization has a set of issues that have to be faced. How are we going to overcome them? Next slide. Those pesky measures are back, those metrics and target values and defined time frames. Because, again, if I don't know how to recognize that I'm getting there, I won't know where I am. I won't have any idea if I'm making progress. And if I can't, I just really believe that if I can't, like the coxswain in a crew, if I can't beat the rhythm, if I don't know that I'm 50%, I'm 75%, I'm 85% there, then, it's a PowerPoint presentation that everybody may love, but it doesn't drive the results. Next slide. Now, at this point, it is not uncommon, not at all uncommon when I'm working with clients, for the HR executive to say, gee, Naomi, our company has a new CEO, or we're going through this change, or we're in the middle of an acquisition, or God only knows what. And, that organizational vision and business outcomes and strategy and so on, it's a little bit squishy at the moment. Or it's well-defined, but I'm not sure we have all the buy-in. Or, we've got a new CEO, we're not sure what changes are going to be in mind. And because we're going to base everything on having a stake in the ground around what the company is trying to accomplish, what the organization is trying to accomplish, this is the moment where sometimes we have to take a little detour. We have to organize a workshop. We have to bring the key executives together. We never say that it is to create their vision, their strategies, their measures. That is probably get fired. We don't do that. No, we say, look, for our purposes, it would be extraordinarily helpful if we could get a little bit of your time to refine our understanding of your brilliant vision, the wonderful metrics, the exquisite strategies. So we never insult them by telling them if they would have just done their job, we'd be better off. We instead organize a low-key workshop. We solicit some input. We do some things we need to do in a very tactful way. But our goal, obviously, is to pin down and get buy-in to what they are telling us is, in fact, the guiding strategy of the company. With that, we are now ready to focus on the people side of the business. And we start in exactly the same place. If the goal of the company, if one major strategy of the organization is to bring new product to market 50% faster than we've ever done in the past, well, how are we going to do that? It's people that bring product to market. So do we need smarter people? Do we have unfilled product roles that need to get filled a lot faster? Are we rewarding people for never taking a risk when, in fact, to speed things up, we need people who will take a risk? We need to be very smart HR people to think through organizational goal by organizational goal, what are we going to do in the people side of the business in order to make that happen? Notice I haven't said unleash self-service. Notice I haven't said comply with every regulation. We know we got to do some things are background. But here we're really focusing on what are the specific people-related strategies. How are we going to design the people side of the business? Not how is it today, but how should it be to achieve those goals. Next slide, please. The slurp you're about to hear is me just taking a quick drink. Nothing very exciting in the drink. So looking at business strategies, we know we have issues. And we know that we're going to have to target those issues in a particular way with particular effort in order to overcome them. So we might as well, identify those obstacles, understand those issues, and get busy. Next slide, please. Those pesky little metrics are back. All too often, we in the human resource management business have used completely the wrong metrics to not only make the alignment between what we're doing and what the organization has to achieve clear, but to make the business case for what we think we should be doing. So, for example, we could measure until we're blue in the face the cost of a new hire. And that is a potentially very useful piece of information, but it doesn't tell us, are we getting the right players? Are we getting the best players? Are we, a year later, seeing an impact on business results because of the players we have hired? So we need to be very careful here that we pick measures that line up with, that are proof points along the way of making HRM connected to those business outcomes. Now, we may need lots of other metrics to run the people business, to run our people factory, if you will. And that's all terrific. We need to do that. But we need to make sure that in having all of those millions of metrics, we don't forget the key ones, the ones that tell you that what you're doing in the people business is, in fact, going to drive business results. Here's a really good example. When an organization is trying to decide, project, forecast its revenues, one of the things they always do is look at the revenue production per salesperson. And let's just pretend it's $1 million, that the average revenue production per salesperson is $1 million. And we want to have $100 million revenue. So, presto changeo, we need 100 salespeople. But maybe not. Maybe, in fact, we could increase quite easily the production per salesperson if they were better equipped, better incented, better hired, better trained, better something. Or maybe we don't even have our sales regions intelligently designed, and some of our salespeople are wasting far too much time on travel because some human being that's supposed to design sales regions has done a bad job. So we really have to look inside some of these metrics. But eventually, our goal is to figure out for our company, for our organization, given our organization's needed business outcomes, what are the critical people metrics that will let us know how well we're doing against them? Next slide, please. Now, if you're an HR professional and you have been privy to these discussions all along the yellow brick road to this point, you have been making notes furiously about potential changes, potential additions, and so on in current human resource management programs, plans, practices. You've been hearing about the information and analytics and metrics needs that we're going to have. You've been seeing where today's business rules may need to be changed, where little small P processes, really workflows and so on, and big P processes are really philosophically big in the sense of promote from within kind of things. You're having all sorts of insights about what works, what doesn't work, what is contributing to the necessary outcomes, what is causing us great difficulty. And you've been scribbling notes like mad. Something else that's been happening along the way, and this is all too common, the HR executive comes to me at this point and says, Naomi, we're not real clear on all of this. There's been a lot of change in our company. We need some help here. At which point, I will typically help them run a workshop to go back and bring the right people in and really revisit the HRM side of the business. Help them formulate what they need to be doing in order to, really line up their needs with the outcomes necessary from the business. And one of the tools I use, if we'll go to the next slide, one of the tools I use is a set of slides. They're not all here, but this is just to give you the flavor, where I've got sort of Naomi's hierarchy of HRM issues, really a Maslow's type hierarchy, where the first bullet represents the things that really are in everybody's mind, and that's HRM efficiency, doing more of what's required with fewer resources. And obviously technology has a huge role to play here. And then we go up a level, effectiveness. And then we're interested in organizational effectiveness. And finally, organizational success. And what I force them to do is flip it around and get out of their comfort zone, and let's really talk about organizational success. How would we generate more revenues? How would we invent more products? How could we more quickly open up global, go into new countries, go into new markets? How could we more quickly digitize our business to cope with the fact that our whole industry is being disrupted? I mean, having that conversation among a group of HR people is very instructive. Some of them actually will know the business and have great ideas, and some of them won't have a clue. And the ones that don't have a clue should not be allowed to play further. Because quite frankly, this is all about the business, all about organizational outcomes. Everything we do drives toward that. And having folks who are too narrow in their mindset doesn't mean they don't have a job to do in the company, but they're not part of it. They really can't be part of a strategic planning effort. Next slide, please. Now, one of the things that comes out of that discussion is a recognition that not all human resource management is created equal. Not everything we do in HR has equal value in terms of business outcomes. And that is a really important recognition, because we need to put our best efforts, our best people, our best thinking behind those aspects of human resource management that are most critical to achieving business outcomes. And frankly, we need to get out from under the rest of it. There's stuff we can stop doing because it was stupid in the first place. There's automation. We can automate the heck out of things that we are today doing manually. There are areas where we could outsource more completely to just free ourselves up, but we have to think differently about what's important. Next slide, please. Now, lurking in the back of the conference room, from the very first moment you start down the yellow brick road, lurking quietly perhaps, but lurking there, has been your chief HRM delivery system architect. This person really understands technology. They understand what kind of a delivery system you have today. They understand the vendor landscape, both software and services. I mean, they know a lot. And maybe no one person knows all of that. Maybe there are 2 or 3 people. But they've been listening to the conversation very carefully. And they've been trying to, in their minds, begin to build a vision of the delivery system of the future. Now, for some organizations, that may not be a major leap from where you are today. For some, it may be, we really have to overhaul the place. But those insights are critical. And there are certainly IT considerations. Usually corporations have, large organizations have an IT strategy. We've got to fit into that somewhere. But they have to have been there from day one and be building their knowledge of the business, building their knowledge of human resource management, and beginning to incorporate all of that into thinking about a delivery system of the future. Next step, please. Money. Gold is good. And here's the issue that so many organizations run into. They really have not been building their business case all along. And as a result, at some point, by some magical means, methodologically rigorous or not, they say, we would like to license this or subscribe that or change this or that. We would like to do this technology stuff. And then the question says, well, how much is it going to cost? And an answer comes back. And then the question is, and what do we get to show for it? And the answer comes back. And frankly, the answers are often very weak. And they're weak for a couple of reasons. The first reason is that it's my generation that did away with all of the clerks, that made it very easy in those days to do a business case, which was headcount reduction. We were doing that in the 60s, and it's now 2012. There ain't any more heads to get rid of. Maybe some data center heads, But in the HR department, we are lean and mean, and most companies have very limited administrative support. So if our whole business case is we're going to get rid of some administrative work, it's not good enough. It's got to be about speeding up new product to market, being better prepared to be globally competitive, having the leadership bench strength that we need to meet our business goals. It's got to be about the business. That's not to say there aren't efficiencies that we can accomplish that really do have cost savings associated with them. That's great. But if that's all we've got, it's really not enough. We've got to be able to drive business outcomes. Next slide. So, your chief HRM delivery systems architect, 2 or 3 perhaps, that have been listening to all of this, going through this yellow brick road journey with you, they've been coming up with their own ideas about what would constitute a great HRM delivery system. And I'd like to share with you just very briefly some of my personal biases, and they are that. I mean, I have strong beliefs that these are reasonable, but other people might disagree. The first is that the administrative and the strategic aspects of human resource management are absolutely intertwined. Find me a great applicant and screw up how we handle the scheduling of their interviews, and we've made a bad impression on them, and they won't join us. Find me a great salesperson who doesn't trust that we are keeping the proper track and the timely track of their accrued commission, and they will waste their time keeping a spreadsheet to double track everything. The administrative and the strategic are inextricably intertwined. I also believe that talent management processes are inherently integrated. That is, if I push in workforce development, if I don't spend enough effort, if I don't do the right things in workforce development, it's going to show up somewhere else. My best people may decide to leave because they feel they are underinvested in. I may not be able to attract the people I need to attract because they don't see that developmental opportunity. So when someone says, no problem, we'll hang a performance thing off here and we'll hang a learning thing over there and we'll get somebody else to do recruitment and we'll do a little something with compensation, from a technology standpoint, that can be a nightmare. But even worse than having bits and pieces from a technology standpoint is to intellectually deal with it in silos. So we need a conceptually holistic, integrated approach to talent management. We have always valued the social networks that people use to get the job done. We have always valued the connectedness of people for certain types of work. Technology now makes it possible to acquire and manage and deploy social networks in a much broader, much richer sense. But we still need human beings who know how to do that, who are good networkers, and to business purpose. So I'm not talking about the baby pictures and all of that. Workers are mobile. Even if they are standing there on the shop floor working at a machine and you know exactly physically where they are, the rest of their 24-hour day, they are on the move. And we would like them to be able to use their time on the move to, update their address, to go through open enrollment for benefits, to put in a leave request, to take a video-based training module. It doesn't all happen when they're physically at their workstation. And for so much of the workforce, we don't have a workstation. So workers and work is much more mobile, much more everywhere, anywhere than it used to be. And we have to be able to deliver human resource management point of sale. We have to meet the customer where the customer is. Next slide, please. If we're going to make better people-related decisions, we better take the power of the firm and push it to the person who's making the decision. If I'm a manager and I am trying to make a hire decision, I need to know a lot. I really need to understand the future performance, possibilities, expectations, based on the candidate profiles that I'm looking at. I really need to understand the behavioral implications of various compensation packages I might be considering. If I'm doing a performance review, I have to understand generational differences, and there are some in the way people deal with feedback and they relate to incentives and recognitions and rewards. So the more useful information, the emphasis being on useful, that we can push to decision makers, point of sale, when they're making the decision and in a very crisp, usable form. No one wants to be drowning in every analytic we can think of. We're going to get better decisions made, and that's critical to driving business results. This next point is one that honest people disagree on. Many people will say to me, Naomi, we are a local government, we are a state government, we are a regional bank. We are not global, and I say to them, you are global. You're competing globally for scarce talent. Your compensation requirements are affected not just by what goes on in your neighborhood, but what's going on around the world. Our economy in the U.S. today is tied completely to what's going on around the world. We do not live in splendid isolation anymore, and neither does any business. And so we increasingly need leadership who are globalists, who can think and behave in this way. And, of course, many, many businesses of any size are, in fact, doing business on the ground in many different countries. Collaboration. I'm a solo practitioner. I have had a solo consulting practice since 1987. If it were not for my colleagues, my clients, all the people I interact with on a day-in and day-out basis, if it were not for the collaboration in which I'm actively engaged, not only could I not do my work, but I would be a nutcase. I couldn't possibly survive because we are social creatures. So when we add collaboration capabilities into all of the work that we do, but specifically here into human resource management processes, when we do it intelligently, when we do it as part of the business process itself, I think we get considerably improved results. And quite frankly, having an endless email trail when we're really trying to get everybody to think about a given topic is a very messy way of handling it. So we clearly need to have collaborative capabilities built into our HRM delivery system. Next slide. So I've shared with you some of my biases about what a good delivery system would behave like. We've had your architect, busy as a beaver, writing down all their ideas, and slowly but surely homing in on sort of the future state for what you've got. Next slide. So what's an HR leader to do? I hope that those of you who have been on today's webinar will have a chance to replay this for your colleagues. I hope that every one of you will either take a look at the wonderful strategic HRM and HRM delivery systems plan that you've already done and decide that in the face of so much activity in the competitive landscape and in your business environment and so on, it's worth a freshening up. For those of you who don't have one, I hope you'll be inspired to start down the journey on the yellow brick road. And there are some very specific things that you can all start tomorrow morning, but given that it's Friday and a weekend ahead, maybe we'll wait till Monday. Here's your task list for Monday. Next slide, please. The first thing to do is gather up all the relevant organizational strategy, current state of HRM, current state of your HRM delivery system information. There are presentations. There are spreadsheets. There's a bunch of stuff floating around, your annual report, all kinds of resources at your disposal, and set up a shared workspace where all of these documents are going to reside, replays of video conferences, whatever, a place where everybody on the project team can go. Begin to go through this kind of material with the eyeballs now tuned to this notion of the journey down the yellow brick road. to really begin to view your company, your organization, through the eyes of a strategic HRM and HRMDS planner. You're going to see patterns in all of this that we can really focus on. I don't know what your biggest challenges are, but you do. Is your biggest challenge that there's some area of scarce competency where if you could just recruit them faster, better, keep them longer, keep them happier, and so on, that would drive results? Is it more that, you know, you're running a company like a large big box store company or a fast foods or chain hotel, whatever, where you need these key manager roles in each of those big boxes because that's really what drives the results in that instance of your business? You're going to see those patterns, and it's those patterns that we really want to focus on. Updating HR policies, practices, plan designs, and so on, that's a long lead time item, and in some cases you need to get that started even as you're continuing to think about technology. Next slide. Obviously, you've got to inventory all of the components of your current HRM delivery system. You've got to know what you have, what's working, what's not working. And let me just mention, something can look like it's working and be costing you big time. It can be costing you in obvious ways of manual workarounds and unmet needs, but it can also be costing you because it's insufficiently agile, it's insufficiently innovative. Just let someone tell me they can only change their org structure on quarterly boundaries because otherwise it messes up the general ledger, and I know that the company is being, choked by bad systems. Next slide. Okay? Get going on your own learning program because it takes a lot of knowledge about technology and what vendors offer, what works and what doesn't. There's some great resources out there. All the vendors you have now, they typically have user conferences. They'll often have sessions that are not related to their product, but are broader sessions. The HR Technology Conference will be in Chicago late fall. I'll hope to see many of you there. I'll also be at the Euro HR Technology Conference in Amsterdam, again late fall. Some of you coming from outside the U.S., that may be convenient. There is a LinkedIn discussion thread, discussion group for the HR Technology Conference with lots of good discussions there and a place where you can ask your own questions. There's many different blogs that are worthy of your attention. I'd like to add mine to that list if I can. But there's a lot out there. The resources are enormous for learning more about what's going on. And you really owe it to yourself and your organizations to make very well-informed decisions when you're ready. Last but by no means least, can you just imagine the mess you're going to have if you have these wonderful embedded analytics that you are pushing out to managers who are using them every day to make decisions, and they are flat wrong because the underlying data is wrong? So we've got to really up our game when it comes to having quality data, particularly around organization, people, our competency models, and so on. We've got it to be clean, up to date, and sufficiently granular to support the kinds of analytics that we want to do. Next slide, please. Amy, that's really what I wanted to talk about. Is it time for Q&A?
It is. Thank you so much, Naomi. Very insightful as always. I'm now wishing that I had a Naomi icon on my computer because that looks pretty awesome. We do have some questions. There is time for folks to add a couple more, though, I believe. And before I do start asking the questions, I want to let everyone know that Naomi has also written a companion white paper that goes into more detail that you can share with your colleagues, keep on your bedside table, all sorts of wonderful things. The white paper is also called Follow the Yellow Brick Road to Business Value, and it will be available along with a recording of this session. Okay, so let's take a look at the questions. So first up, Naomi, could you share a few key HR metrics that you recommend we begin tracking and benchmarking?
Absolutely. If I can start with the assumption of the private sector, public sector is a little different. In the private sector, there is a fundamental metric that needs to be determined on a company-specific basis, and that's taking an appropriate measure of revenue. And I say appropriate because depending on the nature of the industry, revenue can have a lot of squirrely aspects to it. So we need to pick the right one and an appropriate measure of the level of effort that has gone into achieving that revenue. Again, that might be full-time equivalents of our employed workforce. We might want to factor in our contingent workforce if that's a significant part of the equation. But for our company, we need to know dollars of revenue per measure of level of effort, because what we want to do over time, obviously, is get more bang for the buck, more dollars per unit of work, a unit of worker. Okay, so that's one metric that I think is an important one. A second metric, and it's not only important, but it's universal. A second metric, again, that has to be defined company by company, is to understand what really drives results in that company. An example, I did some work with Weyerhaeuser a number of years ago, and for that particular company in the forest products business, the speed with which trees grow is enormously predictive of how profitable they're going to be, because they need those trees. So anything they can do that increases the speed of growth of, by different kinds of trees is a critical metric. And, that's going to be different for every business. At Workday, for example, I would think that one of the critical metrics is going to have to do with the elapsed time between when someone signs a subscription agreement and when they are implemented and in production and therefore paying on their subscription. Well, if that were a critical metric and I was looking for the HRM driver of that, a lot of it would have to do with the tools and techniques that we had developed and were constantly improving that shortened that timeline and reduced the costs therein. So the metrics that make the most sense are very organization-specific, and they really have to be arrived at by looking at what drives value in that organization and what can the people side of the business do about it.
Great. Second question, you mentioned SaaS. What's important to keep in mind if considering a SaaS solution?
Well, since someone asked it, I will answer it. I draw a very firm distinction between true SaaS and not true SaaS, because in true SaaS, we are dealing with an architecture that has been built for the cloud. It is multi-tenant. That means many customers are living in the same instance of the software. It means that when the vendor releases a new version of the software, everybody gets it in roughly the same period of time. There might be a week or two delay because we're feathering those upgrades. It means that, and it's really the most fun part is when you go to a conference that's a real SaaS vendor versus a not real SaaS vendor. At the real SaaS vendor conference, every conversation starts with, how are you using feature X, Y, or Z? Or have you seen the new this? Or, how are you using that? At the not real SaaS conference, every conversation says, what release are you on? What version are you running? Very different conversation. So if I'm a buyer, the first thing I have to understand is what matters to me. And if I really want to run software in my own data center, if I really want to customize and take the full responsibility, and if I really want to manage upgrades myself when I'm ready to take them every 3, 4, 5 years, if that's sufficiently agile, if that's sufficient innovation for me, then there's no reason for SaaS. But if I want to have rich functionality being delivered multiple times a year, if I want to get the benefit of a vendor only spending on one release of the software, if I want to collaborate with other customers in this sharing way, then true SaaS becomes very important. The other piece of it is vendors don't stay in business very long if they don't make money. And, we can talk about startup mode and land grabs and, we're spending money on G&A to capture customers, and that's all well and good, but eventually you got to make money. And I find it difficult to understand how vendors who are supporting an instance of software, however cleverly hosted, on every single customer, I don't see how they can do that as cost effectively as when I'm only supporting one.
Okay, great. We have time for just one last question. What's important to keep in, oh, I'm sorry, I already read that one. Okay, the next one, the third and last question is, what should we manage from our core HR system of record versus integrating with a standalone system?
It's a very difficult question, and that's because if the standalone system has minimal connect points to the system of record, it's more feasible and more manageable to have it as a separate system with a few interfaces back and forth. And a good example, I would say, is recruiting. There's a lot that goes on in the sourcing process that is only relevant to the system of record at very well-defined connect points. When I pass over my requirements for the position that I'm going to post, when I begin to look at candidates. But if I'm looking at something like performance, for example, which has ramifications and connect points across all of human resource management, it's much harder to do it on a completely standalone basis. And there's both a technology set of issues here of just managing interfaces and integration and so on. And we know how to do plumbing and wiring, and if you're willing to spend enough money, you can certainly get that done. But I think part of the challenge is in today's world, self-service is the only service. And we're dealing with employees and managers and prospects and contingent workers and so on who are not really enthusiastic about dealing with the vagaries of multiple system protocols, multiple user experiences, multiple logins, different meanings of data across different systems. I mean, that can be really daunting. So we have to think about this not just from a systems integration perspective as though we were the HR department. We have to think about this from a customer perspective. What does this do to the manager who's very busy and trying to make some quick decisions? Are they having to skip around system to system?
Great. Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much, Naomi. So that's going to conclude our Q&A. And again, I just want to give a heartfelt thank you for Naomi for spending all of this time with us today and answering all these questions. And I want to thank everyone who participated on the call today for your time. And now I'm going to hand back over to Kelly.
Thank you very much, Naomi and Amy, and a special thank you to the folks at Workday for sponsoring the event today. But mostly thanks to all of you in the audience for participating in today's webinar. For those of you who have asked, you can find the recorded webinar for today available at workday.com. Please allow 2 to 3 business days for it to be available. You can also find all the materials available at our talent management webinars archived at www.talentmgt.com/events. Thank you once more to our attendees around the world. We'll see you back here at WebEx on Tuesday, May 15th at 2 p.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. Pacific for our next TM webinar, Strategic HR, Expanding the Power of Personality Assessments. Have a wonderful day.